It was the late 1970s. The air was thick with gospel hymns. The Swaggart name echoed across America, and Donnie Swaggart, the only son of televangelist Jimmy Swaggart, was living under the blinding light of both faith and fame. To the outside world, he was the golden boy of a holy dynasty. But behind the smiling sermons and polished suits, there was something brewing. Something the church was never supposed to know. The perfect Christian couple. In Baton Rouge, Louisiana, churchgoers adored Donnie and his young wife Debbie. The two looked like a portrait of pure Christian love, standing hand in hand beside Jimmy and Frances Swaggart, their faces glowing beneath the sanctuary light. Debbie was soft-spoken, elegant, and completely devoted to her husband's ministry. She rarely spoke to the press, preferring to stay in the background as Donnie's shadow. To those who knew her, she was a quiet force, a woman who carried both grace and sorrow in her eyes. Donnie, on the other hand, was everything his father had molded him to be: fiery in the pulpit, charming on camera, and confident in his divine calling. He was seen as the next generation of Swaggart power. But inside the family home, whispers began to stir. There were arguments, slammed doors, and late-night drives that ended nowhere. According to one former church member who attended Family Worship Center in those years, something shifted around 1979. Donnie stopped looking like himself. His sermons grew shorter, his smiles looked forced, and when he wasn't preaching, he was gone. Whispers of a crumbling marriage. The Swaggarts had always been known to keep their private lives guarded behind thick curtains of scripture and secrecy. But by 1980, rumors had already started leaking into the congregation. People noticed Debbie wasn't attending services as often. When she did, she seemed withdrawn. Meanwhile, Donnie was often spotted traveling alone, something unusual for a pastor's son so newly married. One source who once worked for the ministry's TV department said quietly, "You could feel the tension. Everyone was pretending nothing was wrong, but you could see it. Donnie was distracted." Some claimed it was stress from ministry work. Others whispered something darker. And then came the night that changed everything. The 1980 confrontation. It was said to be a humid Louisiana night in 1980, when Debbie and Donnie had what one insider later described as an argument that shook the house. Neighbors allegedly heard shouting, voices rising, glass breaking. No police report was ever made public, but what followed soon after became undeniable. Debbie packed her things and left. Within weeks, church leadership quietly confirmed that Donnie and Debbie were taking time apart. The official explanation was vague, but those close to the family knew it was serious. The Swaggart ministry said nothing publicly. Jimmy continued preaching as if nothing had happened, quoting forgiveness and family unity in his sermons. But the silence only made the whispers louder. The church begins to talk. At Family Worship Center, gossip spread like wildfire. Some said Donnie had been drinking. Others swore he was spending too much time counseling certain women in the congregation. A former deacon allegedly told a local journalist, off the record, "We were told not to ask questions, just pray." But people talk, and the stories were everywhere. One Sunday morning, Debbie was seen sitting alone in the back row, no longer by her husband's side on stage. Her face was calm, but her eyes told another story. Some say she looked relieved, others say she looked broken. By the end of that year, Debbie and Donnie Swaggart were officially divorced. No press release, no statement, no explanation, just silence. The drinking allegation. Among the earliest rumors to surface after the split were claims that Donnie had developed a drinking problem. Some former associates hinted that his behavior had become erratic and moody. One anonymous former staffer allegedly said, "He'd come to meetings looking tired, agitated. We didn't know if it was stress or something else, but it wasn't the Donnie we knew." However, none of these allegations were ever proven, and no official document confirmed that Donnie Swaggart ever struggled with alcohol. Still, the rumors were enough to stain his reputation within certain circles of the ministry. Some insiders believed these claims were used by rival factions in the church to discredit him, especially during a time when Jimmy Swaggart's own influence was being challenged by other televangelists. The affair that shook the flock. But what really turned the whispers into wildfire came 2 years later. By 1982, word began circulating that Donnie was seeing another woman. Sources within the church claimed that the relationship had started before his divorce from Debbie was finalized, while others insisted it began afterward. Either way, it created a storm within the conservative Pentecostal community. Some older members even confronted leadership, demanding to know if the rumors were true. They wanted answers. How could the son of Jimmy Swaggart, the face of righteousness, be involved in such scandal? A longtime church volunteer later shared in a private interview, people were crying in hallways. They felt betrayed. Donnie was supposed to be the chosen one. Jimmy Swaggart's silent war. Behind closed doors, Jimmy Swaggart was reportedly furious, not just as a father, but as a preacher whose entire empire was built on moral authority. According to one insider, Jimmy called an emergency family meeting that lasted hours. He reminded everyone of the image of the ministry, the importance of forgiveness, and the danger of letting the devil into the home. But even Jimmy couldn't control what was coming. Because soon, the story that began as a private family conflict was about to explode beyond Louisiana. The media catches a whiff. Local newspapers began picking up hints of the Swaggart family drama. Reporters showed up near the church parking lot trying to catch photos of Donnie. Few succeeded. The Swaggarts were masters at protecting their image. Debbie, meanwhile, vanished from the public eye entirely. She moved out quietly, reportedly staying with relatives for some time. People who knew her said she refused to speak badly of Donnie, even when others. She said she was praying for him, recalled one acquaintance, but you could tell she was hurting deeply. The ministry's response, total denial. When questioned, ministry representatives brushed off every rumor as nonsense spread by the enemy. One internal memo, according to a former employee, allegedly instructed staff to avoid discussing family matters under any circumstance. That silence was strategic. In the early 1980s, the Swaggart empire was rapidly expanding. TV stations, radio broadcasts, record sales, and crusades across the country. Any hint of scandal could destroy their carefully built brand. And, for years, it worked. Donnie eventually returned to preaching as if nothing had happened. The divorce was quietly swept under the rug, and those who dared to ask about Debbie were told simply, pray. But secrets have a way of surfacing. While the church moved on, the people didn't forget. Some members left Family Worship Center altogether, saying they felt something spiritual had changed. Others stayed, but whispered behind closed doors. By the mid-1980s, Donnie's name was rarely mentioned in connection with the 1980 scandal, but among old-timers, the story lingered like a ghost. And as Jimmy Swaggart's own public scandals erupted later that decade, many began to look back and ask, had the cracks in the Swaggart legacy started long before Jimmy's downfall? Debbie's quiet life. After the divorce, Debbie faded from the spotlight. Those who knew her say she chose peace over publicity. She reportedly refused all interviews, never wrote a book, never sought revenge. But some say she kept a journal, filled with the pain, betrayal, and confusion she endured during those years. That journal, according to whispers, was later destroyed by her own hand, so no one would ever know the full story. A heartbreaking act of closure, or perhaps protection. Donnie's attempt at redemption. In the years that followed, Donnie Swaggart rebuilt his image. He remarried, returned to the pulpit, and began preaching about forgiveness, redemption, and God's grace, topics that suddenly carried a heavier meaning. Some saw it as genuine transformation, others saw it as image. Regardless, Donnie's voice once again filled the sanctuary, and the congregation welcomed him back. For many, the past was forgotten, or at least buried. But for those who lived through it, the 1980 divorce scandal remained one of the darkest and most carefully hidden chapters in the Swaggart family's history. The legacy of silence. Even today, questions linger. Was Donnie truly struggling with personal demons during that time? Were the drinking rumors fabricated by jealous insiders? Did the alleged affair ever happen, or was it all an attempt to tarnish the Swaggart name? No one outside the family knows for sure. But he, and those who do, aren't talking. One elderly church member put it best. We were told not to question God's anointed, but sometimes, even the anointed. The calm before the storm. By 1983, the ministry seemed stable again. Jimmy Swaggart was at the height of his power, Donnie was back in ministry, and the past seemed erased. But history has a way of repeating itself. What began as a silent family scandal in 1980 would one day mirror the very downfall that shook the Swaggart dynasty years later. And if you listen closely to those who were there, they'll tell you, it all started with that first divorce. That was the beginning of the crack. The 1980s, the illusion of restoration. By 1983, the Swaggart family was back in front of television cameras, glowing with confidence. The family worship center was growing faster than ever before. Jimmy Swaggart's fiery sermons filled stadiums. His gospel albums were topping charts. Donations were pouring in. And there, just a few feet behind his father, stood Donnie Swaggart. He looked renewed, rebuilt, redeemed. The divorce was never mentioned publicly again, not even once. To the faithful, Donnie was a man restored by grace, but to those who had seen the storm up close, it felt more like a cover-up than a comeback. A former choir singer who toured with the ministry remembered. They acted like Debbie never existed. It was eerie. One day she was everywhere, smiling beside Donnie, and the next she was gone. No one said her name again. The Swaggarts called it forgiveness, but some called it erasure, the return to the pulpit. When Donnie returned to preaching, his tone had changed. Gone was the youthful excitement, replaced by a heavier, almost haunted energy. He spoke about sin, temptation, and the dangers of pride, often trembling as he did. Congregants said his sermons had more power than before, more conviction, more tears. But those who looked closer saw something else, a man who was preaching not to the people, but to himself. A cameraman from the ministry later admitted, Donnie used to stop taping mid-sermon. He'd go quiet, look at the cross, and then start over, like he was wrestling with something inside him. The congregation didn't know that behind the camera lights and Bible verses, Donnie was still rebuilding the pieces of his own life. And though he'd remarried, some insiders whispered that old wounds never truly heal. The second marriage. When Donnie remarried, many in the church saw it as a new chapter, a second chance. His new wife was supportive, elegant, and deeply involved in ministry life. Together, they seemed poised to restore what had been broken. But privately, some longtime staff members wondered if Donnie had ever truly let go of his past. One insider claimed he'd sometimes mention Debbie by accident, not in a bad way, just like someone who hadn't closed a chapter yet. It wasn't malice, it was memory. Donnie was trying to live up to his father's empire, his mother's strength, and the expectations of millions who saw him as a reflection of holiness. But inside, the scars of his first marriage still lingered, scars that would quietly shape his future. A scandal that changed everything. Then came 1988. The world was shocked when Jimmy Swaggart, the patriarch of the family, the man who had preached against sin with thunder and tears, was caught in a scandal that rocked the entire Christian world. The televangelist empire that once stood untouchable began to crumble overnight. While cameras captured Jimmy's tearful confession, "I have sinned against you, my Lord," Donnie stood off to the side, pale and silent. It was the moment that every buried secret, every whispered rumor came rushing back. For the congregation, it was deja vu. They remembered 1980. Ebrehui, they remembered the silence. Hebrewi, they remembered the lies. And this time, they weren't so quick to forgive. Donnie's breaking point. In the aftermath of his father's downfall, Donnie became the reluctant face of survival. While Jimmy retreated from public view for a time, Donnie stepped forward to steady the ministry. He preached about restoration, about picking up the broken pieces, about how even God's chosen can fall and rise again. But those close to him